11th gen versus 10th gen, the importance of RAM speed, 11th gen power limits, and how do these Intel chips compare to AMD's Ryzen 3600? Lots of interesting things in this one. I recently picked up the i5-11400 to test its capabilities as a GPU. CRG had added its integrated graphics solution, the UHD 730, to a list of recommended minimum spec GPUs. Now, that didn't turn out very well. It was completely unusable. But is this a decent CPU? I've been recommending the i5-10400 and the Ryzen 3600 as minimum spec CPUs for a while now. But if you have a 10400, should you consider popping an 11400 in your system? All this testing has been done with an RTX 4080 to remove any possible chance of being GPU bottlenecked at 1080p, and to give these CPUs the best chance, I've used 32 gigs of RAM, even though, in my opinion, 16 is still fine for a minimum spec. And I've tested them with the RAM at 2666 MHz and 3600 MHz to show you that even though the CPU is still the biggest factor in Star Citizen performance, running faster RAM might actually be a better upgrade for some people. And at the end, we'll look at power limits and how that can affect things, because these 11th gen CPUs run hot and use a lot of power. Let's start off as we often do in Lawville. I've done lots of runs here to get good data. You'll see that the 10400 versus the 11400, well, there's not a massive difference in performance. If we then pop in the 3600, again, you'll see that that kind of fits, as it always has, kind of matching the 10400. And the 7800 X3D is just there to show you really what the maximum you can get in Lawville is at this point. But when we turn the RAM speeds up, we put on the XMP profile, you can see that we are getting a fairly decent bump in performance for all of these CPUs. Now, it's worth saying at this point that depending on the motherboard you've got, you might not be able to apply these RAM speeds at all. The 10th gen stuff, especially if you've got a 400 series motherboard, it's quite limited. I'm using a B560 motherboard here, and it allows me to apply the RAM speed to both the 11400 and the 10400. Ryzen can be a bit iffy when you're using faster RAM speeds, but actually from around the 3000 series upwards, it's okay. I don't think I'll be able to hit this with the 2600 that I've got. This is another good reminder that the speed your RAM is running at really does affect performance quite a lot. Again, as I always say, make sure you've got your XMP or Expo profile running. If you've updated the BIOS or anything like that, it would have reset down. The easiest way is to get your task manager open and just go to the performance tab, and you can see what speed the RAM is running there. But it doesn't take a lot to go into the BIOS and turn on XMP or Expo profiles, and it will give you performance. And the other thing really is that it's questionable what's the better upgrade. Say you had the 10400, should you go out, spend the money and get an 11400 and gain 3 FPS? Or would you be better off potentially buying RAM that runs faster, effectively takes it another 2 FPS? So obviously the best case scenario here is the 11400 with the 3600 mega transfers for the RAM, but the 10400 does get a big boost just by using faster RAM. Next up, in Area 18, the run through there, again, I've got both the RAM speeds, and I've got the 7800 X3D as the maximum potential. But again, it follows pretty much the same pattern. Faster RAM makes a fairly decent difference to each of these CPUs, and they kind of stay as they did in Lawville. The order is basically the same. Next up, quantum travel. Now, these are harder to test, these next few, because I just can't do as many runs in these. And what you find now is that with the replication layer update, and we've got server crash recovery in the game, servers can crash, and where they previously, that would be it, they'd be gone and you get a new one up. They now can recover, and so servers are up for longer, entity counts are more varied, and just in general, I think testing in these sorts of areas where you can't do loads and loads of runs, I think the data is likely to be more iffy, because some servers have been up for maybe days. You might pop onto a server that's been up for just a small amount of time, and so I think performance now is varying per server that you get on more than it ever has done in Star Citizen. But the data still kind of points in the same direction. We're seeing that RAM speed makes a huge difference to performance, and obviously the numbers are higher, so the improvements are higher here when you pop the faster RAM on, but the order is still the same. The 11400 is out in front in all these cases. And it's really the same pattern in space. The 11400 is consistently out in front, and again, the RAM pushes things a bit further. On the Ryzen roof, just looking at the faster RAM tests here, again, you see exactly the same pattern. The 11400 is a bit further out in front. The other two are basically matched. So far though, we're not actually looking at the full potential of this 11400 because Rocket Lake, these 11th gen CPUs, had a big, some might say, issue with power. They are incredibly power hungry and they run hot because of that. And so depending again on your motherboard, likely there's going to be a power limit on some of the chips that you might pop in. And so for this CPU, for me, in my BIOS, you get this screen, and by default, I hit this power limit here of 65 watts. Now, I've gone back into Lorville and I've done some testing with the tower cooler selected, and I actually put a tower cooler on versus the stock cooler. And so there's no issues with the heat. For the 65 watt limited runs that I did, the average for the CPU max clock was a lot lower than its full potential. On the right, we're just completely locked at 4200, whereas actually the average for the 65 watt power limited selection in the BIOS is only 3724. But get your predictions in now. How much performance has that gained? Again, these CPUs were notorious for being very power hungry, didn't bring massive support performance in some cases. What's your prediction? What are we going to get for all that extra power? We're actually getting a massive 2 FPS more. I mean, it's not dramatic, and you're using a lot more power to get that 2 FPS, but it's not nothing. And so if you've got an 11th gen CPU, I would highly recommend looking in your BIOS, just maybe running some tests similar to this, finding out what is going on. Are you being power limited? Can you eke out a little bit more? I mean, you've got to check you've got the cooling capacity to actually cool the thing, but there is a little bit more performance to be had. So what to make of all this? Well, obviously, as you'd expect, the 11th gen performs slightly better than the 10th gen. And so if you are on a 10th gen CPU and you've not got tons of budget to maybe build a whole new system, you will get slightly more performance by upgrading to an 11th gen. And this really would still apply to maybe the i7s or maybe even the i9s. It should scale up the stack as you go, but it's nothing massive. And as we saw, actually faster RAM made a bigger difference to performance. Remember, not all motherboards will allow you to even apply an XMP profile, and so you do need to do research before you do that. RAM, as I always say, bit of a under the radar thing. I often bang on about CPU performance, but the RAM speeds in all the testing I've done, every single time I've tested this, it's significant. It makes a really significant difference. The good news with these CPUs here is that they're all hitting around the 30 FPS mark in Lorville. And so these are the minimum spec CPUs. And you could also include the i7-8700 from Intel, because that is still a 6-core, 12-thread part, and it performs basically the same as the 10th gen i5. So you got a selection of CPUs. You don't really want to go any lower than that. In the past, when I've tested the other Ryzen chips, the 1st gen and 2nd gen Ryzen chips do not quite cut the mustard anymore. So these are the ones you'd want to go for. If you've got them, get some fast RAM. That'll probably do it for this one.